Hey everyone, thank you for watching. Today's video I'm excited to do. I'm going to be reviewing all of the books that I read in the month of October. I actually have 7 books that I read, so that is the most since I've started this book series on my channel. If you want to hear about all the books and which ones I would recommend, let's go ahead and get started. Alright, welcome. If you are new here, I started this book series on my channel I think maybe like 3 months ago, but I've actually been a book blogger since 2009. It was how I started in social media, and I still do run my blog, which is chicletplus.com. Over here I do beauty, books, lifestyle, business, and I also have a dog and her name is Aries, and she loves to join me when I film in my bedroom. I would love if you would subscribe and stick around, but like I said, we have 7 books to get through, so I'm going to try to get through them pretty quickly. I have some that I really enjoyed and I have some that I really did not enjoy so much, but the first book is Some of It Was Real by Fischer, and from the synopsis it says a psychic on the verge of stardom who isn't sure she believes in herself and a cynical journalist with one last chance at redemption are brought together by secrets from the past that also threaten to tear them apart. From my review I said, do you ever start a book and 2 pages in you're like, I have no idea what I'm about to read, but I know it's going to be good? That was my thought when I started reading this book. So we have more of a women's fiction novel here, but our main character Sylvie is a psychic medium, and what started as her doing this like on the sidewalk transformed into her having shows, and now she's in the talk for reality TV. She meets this kind of undercover journalist at one of her shows, and he is very against psychic mediums because his mom is kind of really wrapped up in this idea of being able to connect with her deceased husband and also son, and she has spent a lot of money on frauds. And so this journalist is determined to bring down these psychic mediums. So the two are kind of thrown together. We do have a romance angle with them, but there's a little bit of like push and pull that we get throughout the way. But really the main thing is you're trying to figure out if Sylvie actually is the real deal. Because like from the synopsis, she says she even doubts herself sometimes. And then Thomas is kind of finding these little ways to pinpoint that maybe she isn't being the most truthful. So that was kind of an interesting, I wasn't really sure what was gonna happen there. While I also enjoyed that there was a romance angle, it really wasn't the biggest part of the book. It was really Sylvie's career, Thomas trying to take her down, but then there's also this entirely other story of Sylvie's early days. Her parents were allegedly killed in a plane crash and she was adopted, but everything has been very kind of secretive, hush hush. There's been a lot of mystery around her adoption and her family. And as you go through, you can kind of sense that maybe she's blocked something out, but what is it? And when you get to the end, I mean, my mouth was like on the floor. I really couldn't quite believe what it was that I was reading. It was heartbreaking. I shed a few tears at the end, but it was all written in such a fascinating way that I couldn't stop most of my books on my Kindle. And I felt like I just kept grabbing for my Kindle and grabbing for my Kindle because I was like, I'm not sure where this book is going to take me next. In the review, I said this was such a fascinating novel, yet I'm having troubles putting into words everything I want to say about this one because I feel like I could ramble forever. I called it a riveting page turner, sure to capture your attention. I think it would be a great book club pick if you're a part of a book club, and I gave it a 5-star review. Highly, highly recommend. Next up, we have A Dress of Violet Taffeta, and this is by Tessa Arlen. So this is an historical fiction novel. I don't read historical fiction the most. I like chick lit, women's fiction, cozy mystery, but I also like suspense and thrillers. Every once in a while something draws me in, and I like to be able to reach for one, gets outside of my, you know, usual comfort reading zone, if you will, reading comfort zone. But this one I have to say drew me in because there is ties to the Titanic, and I am someone who is still fascinated with the Titanic today. So when I read that, I was like, I have to check this one out. So in here we follow Lucy Duff Gordon. She is actually a real person. She is a survivor of the sinking of the Titanic. For my review, I said I wasn't familiar with the name Lucy Duff Gordon before reading this, but I loved learning about a self-made woman that did so much to pave the way in women's fashion and beyond. So Lucy's husband ends up leaving her. She gets a divorce, and this is in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Divorce is like unheard of, and she actually decides to start her own dressmaking business to be able to support herself and also her young daughter, because now she doesn't have a husband to do that anymore. A woman having her own business is pretty much unheard of as well. And especially in here, you know, how women were supposed to look and dress and act, to have a heroine who was going against the grain, like designing lacy underwear. I mean, that was a scandal. You know, that was a scandal at the time. I said in my review, this was thought-provoking and made me want to cheer at times, because I loved learning about someone who I wasn't familiar with. In some of the historical fiction novels that I read, I really tend to be drawn to strong female characters. To learn about the women who came before me, the Mad Girls of New York, I've reviewed that on my channel following Nellie Bly, who made such great strides in female journalism. Those are the books that I feel like I'm tend to drawn to because of those heroines. I will say the Titanic bit kind of drew me in initially. We really don't get there until over halfway through the book, and it's really just like 2 chapters. Titanic fan in me, I was almost like a little bit sad. It was interesting to hear more talk about the survivors and some of the lawsuits that happened because of it, and how that actually affected, again, real life Lucy Gordon and her new husband in the book. She does end up remarrying. Her husband survives the sinking of the Titanic as well. Kind of get a little bit about survivor's guilt in there also, and just a few other fascinating concepts for that time and how people then viewed the survivors of the Titanic and what they dealt with. Just learning about kind of a fearless businesswoman that wanted to do her own thing, but also make other women feel beautiful and feel comfortable. A little bit more of a slower paced novel, which sometimes historical fiction can tend to be for me. So like with some of it was real, I kept itching to pick up my Kindle. This one I was like, oh, okay, like let's see what's going on. So I gave it a 3.5 star review, but if you love historical fiction, this might be one for you. The next one I have is Thank You Next, and this is by Andie J. Christopher. So we follow Alex Turner. She's never the one, but always the last one in X dates before finding love, and now she's determined to find out why in this rom-com. So from my review, I said there was a lot from the synopsis that drew me into this book, and I finished it thinking there was so much untapped potential. So Alex is a single divorce attorney, and she kind of comes off in the beginning as extremely confident. Some of the one-liners she has in there around her breakups are like pretty hysterical. So she sees one of her exes on Say Yes to the Dress with his new fiance, and she spends a night, she has a low moment, she goes through all of her exes on, you know, social media, and she sees that every single one of them has gotten engaged, married, or found a long-term partner right after she broke up with them. And so she wanted to figure out like why that was happening. So she makes it her mission to go and like track down all of these guys. And some of the guys talking to her about like why she broke up with them, I was like, this character is kind of hilarious. But at the same time, she was like that way, but then she was also a different way, and then she would come across as very like unsure and more timid, and then there's a romance angle that gets involved also, that she comes off like, I don't see her as that bold, confident, I'll say whatever to your face. So it was a little bit confusing. I couldn't really like seem to flesh out her character the best. We also have the love story between Alex and Will, which first of all was like slightly weird because there's like some sort of like family dynamic involved in there. Like I know it was like through marriage, but it was still like kind of like her uncle at one time. So I was like trying to figure that out. I feel like that was just kind of like a little bit on the strange side to me. This is a very steamy, like doesn't hold back with sex scenes. So if that is not your thing, I would definitely not recommend this book for you, because it's very much written to me in a modern way, which I can appreciate. There's a huge talk of diversity with the cast. There's talk with, you know, female sexuality and that sort of thing. So I find that kind of refreshing these days. So while I did appreciate that and it covered some hard topics and some taboo ones, I really loved Alex's grandmother, Lexi, who was quite funny. I said in here, this is kind of more of that enemies to lovers book. I said that angle wasn't quite there because their feelings of angst towards one another was really just like an outward expression to protect themselves. It was obvious we were just waiting for them to get there, which again, usually there's just like a little bit more oomph behind it, whereas this one was all of their inner thoughts were like, I want this person, I want that person, but then they were just like mean to each other. It just, that angle wasn't quite pulling me in, so I wasn't really getting the romance either. So I gave this one a 3-star review. I said I hope to enjoy this one a little bit more, but not a favorite rom-com for me. Then we have, totally changing paces here, Firstborn by Will Dean. So this is a psychological suspense thriller, and this is one of the most messed up books that I have read. And I read a lot of messed up books because, again, I love me some chick lit. Like, to me, it's nice to read like psychological suspense thrillers and then balance it out with like a chick lit or a rom-com or something a little bit lighter, because this is one that I was like, what in the world? In my review, I said, I felt so conflicted after finishing this one. On one hand, I was definitely curious to keep reading because I had no idea where the book was going. But on the other hand, I had a hard time keeping up with the numerous plot twists and had several WTF moments. It also just left me kind of sad that we follow a true sociopath with no regard to truly anyone else, family or not. There are several highly disturbing scenes, and while I can appreciate being kept on my toes, especially as we got to the end, I had to wonder what was actually believable. I said I closed the book feeling more confused and in disbelief than anything else. So we follow two twin sisters, Molly and Katie. And Molly lives in London. Her identical twin sister, Katie, is now living in New York. Her parents, their parents are there visiting, and they call to say Katie has been found murdered in her bed. So Molly travels from London to New York to figure out why. And honestly, I feel like that's all I can say, because from there, nothing really makes sense. We get a pretty big plot twist just a few chapters into the story that I was like, oh, okay, I wasn't expecting that. And then a few chapters later, there's another plot twist, and I was like, all right. And then we get another plot twist. And again, it just got to be so confusing. It was genuinely hard to follow along as a reader. Like I said, it was also just sad because we follow very genuinely just a sociopath. And for me, it's like, I don't really like to read things that are really gruesome. I don't like horror. There's a couple of scenes in here that are pretty gritty. Also, at the end of the day, I just felt like there's no sort of chance of redemption. There's no any sort of like happy ending. And if that's a kind of novel that you like, if that's kind of the suspense thriller that you enjoy, I would suggest Firstborn. But for me, I just kind of closed it and just felt icky. I gave this one a 3-star review, not a favorite. The next one, it was funny to follow up Firstborn with reading The Birdcage by Eve Chase, because once again, this was a novel where I was like, not necessarily sure where this is going. It's described as an emotional mystery. There can be a little bit of like psychological suspense intertwined in here as well. It's not really, I guess I wouldn't really describe it as like a thriller or necessarily scary or anything like that. But we have half-sisters, Kat, Flora, and Lauren. They're summoned to their remote Cornish summer home by their father. So the three sisters, their dad was like a philandering artist back in the day, and ended up having these 3 daughters, all pretty close within one another. And we go back and forth between the past to the summer where the girls are teens, and there is going to be this eclipse that they are going to be watching that's kind of like the lead up to everything in the past. And then we also have the present where the girls are back in their summer home with their father. And you can tell that something happened the night of the eclipse, but you're not sure what, but it's kind of shaped who they are today. So we keep going back and forth from past to present. And I said, as I got through chapter after chapter, my mind was already writing my review. Good, but a little slow. Interesting, but not keeping my attention. But I kept reading, and I kept getting more intrigued, and then the plot twist really started coming. I closed the book in deep thought, going back through the early chapters and recalling bits and pieces that made a little more sense at the end. I said this was a complex novel. It's very character driven. And I said I would encourage you to keep reading if you decide to pick this one up, because the first few chapters I do think are pretty sluggish, and they keep mentioning this elusive eclipse, but it's like nothing's really like kind of making sense in the first few chapters. I'm like, where are we going with this one? But I said, if you stick with it, it's a perfect cozy night in book of choice. It ended up being a much more emotional and complex novel than I was thinking when I first started it, and the ending just kind of hits you right in the feels. Like I cried a little bit at the end as the final like kind of conclusion, when you figure out what happened the night of the eclipse, and then everything that happens after that just kind of hits you right in the feels. But again, for fall, like you want to cozy up a night in, you want to have your robe on and your candle lit and cozy up with your dog, whose mine is still right here. The Birdcage is a good novel to choose. After that, we have Andrea Hoffman Goes All In, and this is by Diane, Cohen, Schneider. This, again, we're like totally flipping gears here. This is more of a women's fiction novel. We follow Andrea Hoffman, who starts working in the finance world of the early 1980s in Chicago. I'm not sure necessarily what gravitated me towards this book. I either like things written in present time, or a historical fiction, or written in dual perspectives from past and present. And the 1980s is kind of like that middle ground where I'm like, I don't know, but I guess like, let's just see. I'm more interested in finance these days. So I was like, why not? And I said I wasn't really sure what to expect from a novel that follows a woman in finance in the 80s, but I'm glad that I was intrigued enough to say yes. I said that this is a breath of fresh air amongst the usual books in my to-read pile. And what stuck out to me was that I really felt like I was just following Andrea along in life without a ton of drama. There wasn't a huge romantic angle, or like we were just waiting for a catastrophe to drop. This one was really just like, I was reading about someone's life, but it was written in such a way where, because I feel like that maybe sounds boring, but it really wasn't. And I thought it was so fascinating hearing how people really spoke during that time and in the finance world, and what they did for clients and what their equipment looked like. I thought it was like so fascinating. And you're also getting an authentic behind the scenes of how a woman was determined to make it in a male dominated world in the 80s, which is obviously, that's still something that goes on today, and the hardships that a woman faces in the male dominated industries. But in the 80s, a lot of men really feel like they can do whatever, especially when a woman is involved. From my review, I said, I can honestly say I didn't expect to love this book, even after being a few chapters in, but toward the end, I wish it just would have kept going. It was so enjoyable to be along the ride with Andrea. I gave it a 5-star review. Like, this book is just so different from so many novels that I read, and that's why I called it a breath of fresh air, and it was just fun and enjoyable. I liked learning about a time, you know, before I was born, and an industry that I don't know much of and that has obviously changed so much today. I just thought it was a cool book. Like, that's what I said in my review. I said, for a lack of a better word, I just thought this novel was really cool. I highly recommend that you read it. And the last book that I read in October, I'm actually in the middle of writing my review right now, but I know I'm about to lose the light. It's about 5 o'clock. This one is The Accidental Newlywed Game, and this is by Jaci Burton. Now, this is the 3rd book in the Boots and Bouquets series, but I have not read the other 2. I'm always looking at the synopsis and I take note if it's a part of a series, and I saw that this one was. I wasn't familiar with the series, haven't read the books. I have to say, when I read the first line of the synopsis, I was like, okay, let me read this. It says, what happens in Vegas doesn't stay in Vegas. One night out turns into a wedding that neither newlywed can remember. I live in Las Vegas and I love the city so much, and I love hearing people's stories of when they come to Vegas. We follow wedding planner Honor Bellini. She's in Las Vegas when she runs into her sister's ex-fiance, Owen, and they go out, have a crazy night out, and they wake up and they're married. They got wedding rings on, they have their wedding certificate, but neither of them can remember it. And they decide to get an annulment. Both of them, you can sense, kind of have feelings for each other, so they keep finding ways to delay getting this annulment. And one of the big storylines was Honor being like, well, maybe she's pregnant. They can't get divorced because, like, what if she's pregnant? And that just seemed like a very forced storyline to me. And there kept being, it just was, I ended up not loving this one, which I'm disappointed in, but that storyline just was like a little bit strange to me. She kept putting emphasis on the fact that she's not drinking because she might be pregnant, but then her sister Erin is pregnant. But then there's multiple times where she points out that Erin's choosing not to drink right now, and it's like, well, because she's pregnant. Like, it just, there was some scenes that I just thought was like kind of confusing. And then also the whole, she getting with her sister's ex-fiance, who they'd been together for a long time. They were about to get married. Again, kind of like in Thank You Next, I was like, I don't know, that just seems like a little uncomfortable at the same time, but you know, you love who you love and all of those things. But her sister Erin definitely has some anger towards the two of them getting together, which I kind of understood. But then at the same time, the Erin feud gets drug out for so many chapters, and then it's like the whole family is involved, and it just seemed a little over the top and kind of like page fillers at that point. So this one ended up not being a favorite for me. I was gonna give it probably anywhere between 2 and 3 stars as I write my review. Steamy romance in here, so if those aren't your favorite scenes, I wouldn't recommend this one. Never really felt connected to the book. I liked the beginning scenes with Vegas and like walking through the casinos and all of that. I always think that's so fun. After that, it was kind of like I'm not sure what's going on here. I'm not really vibing with this book. So unfortunately, we're gonna have to end it on a not so high note. There are some other ones that I really enjoyed. We have some 5-star reviews in here. I will link all of these books in my description box, both to my review on Chick Lit Plus and also to them on Amazon if you're interested in checking any of them out. I would love to know what books have you been reading and loving the past month or so. Please let me know in the comments. And as always, if you enjoyed this one, please make sure to give it a thumbs up. I hope you also consider subscribing before you go, and I'll see you in my next video.